Welcome to Hatman Strikes Back Daily Boxing News. Shout out to everybody in the live chat. Let's do a little roll call. We got Gordon in the chat. We got TC. Big up, big up. We got Carly in the house. Big up, Carly. We got Tom. Ben Odom. Shout out to Ben. Belt Loops Matter. Parliamentary Procedure with a fantastic name. We got another Ben. We got EJ. Big up EJ. We got Agni. Todd Lee. Ibrahim. Jake. The Shed. Robbo Robert Striker. Belt Loops Matter. W. Jack Trussler. HB. Todd Lee. The Iron Jaw Chickasaw. Excuse me. Dave Warren. Sean Taylor, MT. Anthony YouTube, of course. Big up, big up. Mark Hatch. KB, Rem. Flock in the house. Sean, King Kong. Ocean Blue. Cow, is that how you pronounce your name? Cow. K-A-U. We got Dan Warb. We got Bigger Ank. We got LJR24. Who else we got here? Ruz B. Adam. Don Gorgon, big up. The Size Game. Who else we got in here? We got Shay. We got Rick. We got Exactamundo. We got Dan Heaney. Ed Ellaby. Jimmy Chang. Aaron. Kyle. Yes, Wagwan Kyle. Hold tight, Stew in the queue. Isidore, big up Isidore. Earth Summed Up, shout out. Afro Soul, yes, Julius. Live chat in full effect. So, we're going to be talking about Oleksandr Usyk's next move. Who you guys think he should be fighting next? So let's switch up the visuals. Who should Oleksandr Usyk fight next? Now, first of all, let's take a look at the heavyweight rankings. So you can see Oleksandr Usyk has got all the belts. There is Kubrat Pulev, who's the regular with the WBA. Fabio Wardley, the interim. You've got Agit Kabayel, interim with the WBC. Joseph Parker, interim with the WBO. So, basically, for 3 of his belts, he's got essentially mandatories knocking on the door. And these mandatories have been pushed back, I want to say, because of these undisputed unifications that Oleksandr Usyk has been participating in, and of course the defense of his unified in the Luke Partridge aka Tyson Fury rematch. But now, if I haven't already said this, it's time for these mandatories to get called. It's time for these guys to get their shots. And a separate issue here is going to be, will Oleksandr Usyk get stripped, or will he choose to vacate certain belts for not being able to fulfill his mandatory obligations? I personally think he should be. Not that Usyk has done anything wrong per se, although you could say he shouldn't have agreed to rematch clauses for certain fights. But at the end of the day, we know who the number 1 heavyweight in the world is. This is a guy who's never ducked a challenge. This is a guy who didn't even have to fight Dubois a second time, but he wanted to put to bed all of this nonsense about a supposed knockdown in their first fight. That's the kind of guy he is. He wants to put any kind of doubts to bed once and for all. That's why he took the fight. And yeah, so if he vacates or gets stripped, we still know that he's the man, and I'm sure he will continue to fight if he continues to box. I'm sure he'll continue to take on, should I say, the top opposition, the most dangerous opponents. I hope he does anyway. Or else why continue? So, you know, obviously there's money, but he hasn't been as money motivated as some other fighters. Obviously, he likes to get paid, but he's more willing to take the risks, to take the challenges than many other fighters in all weight classes. So here is the heavyweight top 15 with all 4 major sanctioning bodies. You can study those names. We're going to go through a few of them. All right. Again, shout out to everybody in the live chat. We got Matt with a super chat early. He says Usyk should fight Parker and last do a Ukrainian morale fight against a random Russian. Okay. That's an interesting idea. Usyk had more fans at Wembley than Dubois. He definitely had a lot of support, without a shadow of a doubt. A lot of support, and he's very popular in the UK now. Yes, despite the fact he doesn't speak the greatest English, and he still has a translator on deck for a lot of his interviews and press conferences and whatnot, his charisma and his personality still comes across. It can still be picked up on. And obviously, British boxing fans have always been great admirers of fantastic talent, and they can see the kind of champion that Oleksandr Usyk is. First of all, he's a David type character. You know, in the David and Goliath scenario, he's a small guy, relative for, you know, by today's standards, relatively small heavyweight and older, taking on younger, bigger guys. So you've already got people rooting for him for that reason alone, because he's the David and the Goliath situation. He's traveling to people's backyards and he's beating people, you know, time and time again. So yeah, that's one of the reasons that, again, along with the way British boxing fans are, they've got no problem supporting foreigners, British boxing fans, who go over to the UK and beat up the Brits. As long as they are respectful and stuff like that, British boxing fans will get behind him. They get behind him. They've always been like that. And so, yeah, Usyk is obviously connected to the UK. He won his gold medal in the Olympics in the UK. And he's had so many great nights in Britain at the expense of British fighters, you know? So, yeah, he had a lot of support. Big up, Matt. Shout out to Mr. Luca for the super chat. He says, Luke Partridge said that about Dubois because he doesn't want any pressure to fight him. Do you want to clarify? He said, what about Dubois? I'm missing the context here. Big up, Mr. Luca. But if you could just provide me some context. Is it something I've already mentioned? You know, my memory ain't the best. My short-term memory. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. Don't push the horses. Apocalyptic forewarning. Yes. Shout out to Isaac. Don't push the horses. For those who are not familiar, it's kind of a way of saying don't poke the bear, as I understand it. Mr. Lucas says saying he didn't quit. I'll come on to that in tomorrow's stream because, yeah, I'm doing a stream about Luke Partridge and this fake sympathy he's expressing for Daniel Dubois. It's totally fake. It's really just sickening how fake and pathetic Luke Partridge's, again, sympathy, so-called, for Daniel Dubois is, saying, oh, he didn't quit and you can't call any fighter a quitter who gets in the ring and this, that. What a load of contradictory nonsense from Luke Partridge. Again, we'll come on to that tomorrow. I'll really explain from a psychological perspective, from a manipulation perspective, why Tyson Fury's saying all that. We'll really take a deep dive on that tomorrow. But shout out to Mr. Luca each and every time. He's part of the the Brotherhood of Palpatine. Shout out to Mr. Luca. But Mr. Luca is saying that Partridge said that about Dubois because he doesn't want any pressure to fight him. That might be an aspect of it, but I think there's a bigger reason why Tyson Fury is coming out with all this sympathy for Daniel Dubois. Shout out to Mr. Luca again. Shout out to Danny again. Again, don't push the horses. Shout out to Mura's man. He says, Usyk, the most technically sound heavyweight ever. You know what? I might even agree with you on that. The most technically sound heavyweight ever, because this guy just makes so few mistakes in fights, you know? He's definitely up there. He you know, if you don't want to say he's the top 5 or in the top 5 heavyweights of all time based on resume, you couldn't really based on resume. On ability, and that's very subjective, of course, on who you think could beat who in a fantasy matchup, yeah, you could put him conceivably in the top 5. But as far as technical ability, yeah, you could put Usyk because he makes so few mistakes. He's so polished from a technical perspective. So I wouldn't argue with that, Moroz man. A fantastic technical fighter. Shout out to Patriotic Joe. He says, only people I think beat Usyk, Jayo Pataya and Moses. All right. Personally, I don't think Pataya or Moses beat Usyk right now. I think there's going to need to be some more father time deterioration for Oleksandr Usyk. I wouldn't pick either of them against him, let's say if they were to fight next. But maybe in a year's time, it might start to look that way. You know, I might have that same opinion. Shout out to Patriotic Joe. Shout out to Matt. He says, Lawrence Okolie shouldn't even be on a list, period. Okay, Matt, not a fan of Lawrence Okolie. Personally, I thought Okolie's performance against Kevin Lerena, while it wasn't a scintillating performance, I thought it was okay. It wasn't a horrible hug fest, which the likes of which we've seen from Okolie many times before. And Okolie actually did tear his bicep. You could see it in the fight if you go back and watch it. And you could also, I mentioned this in the live stream commentary I did for Okolie's fight against Kevin Lerena. At the end of the fight, Okolie was in the ring and he was pointing at his bicep, and his coach was saying, you know, was talking to him, and they were analyzing, you know, looking at his arm and inspecting his arm or whatever. And you could see that his bicep looked weird. Subsequently, we find out that, yes, he actually tore his bicep early in the fight. He says in the first round. So that's why he wasn't popping the jab, because I noted in the fight that he wasn't popping his jab. I thought maybe because it was just the clashing lead hands of the Orthodox versus Southpaw. But no, apparently it was because Lawrence Okolie couldn't pop his jab. He had a torn bicep, like a badly torn bicep. I think he's posted pictures on social media as well of the bicep and how weird it looks since it's torn. But personally, I don't think his performance against Lerena was that bad. It was, you know, okay. But shout out to Matt. Shout out to KB for the super chat. He says, Don Charles doing his victory tour after defeat. So he's like Edgar Berlanga then, huh? Yeah, Don Charles doing a lot of media at the moment. Is it damage limitation? Is he trying to get ahead of not just criticism, but also a potential sacking, a potential P45 in a post? Is that why Don Charles is doing all this media? Shout out to KB. Shout out to Jay Silver. He says, people saying Stan Dubois is the British Joe Jackson. I think it's a fair comparison, right? Here we have a guy who's got like, what is it, 10 or 11 kids who all live with him. You never see a woman around. Like, where are the mothers of the kids? It's just it's so weird to have that many kids and you never see even one of the mothers. Maybe most of them have got the same mother. I can't imagine they've all got the same mother because there's a lot of kids. So I think it's a fair comparison calling him the British Joe Jackson. And obviously Joe Jackson, how can I describe it? He guided his kids to a lot of success, but at the same time, there was a darker side to him, Joe Jackson. And Stan Dubois, according to the likes of Spencer Fearon, there's a darker side to him as well. Spencer Fearon, should I say infamously, accused Stan Dubois of engaging in the dark arts, right? Juju, witchcraft. Now, one thing I can tell you regarding Caribbean and African witchcraft is that whether you believe in this stuff or not, in terms of its effect, whether you believe in it or not, that's irrelevant. I'm just going to tell you that the people who use it, the people who engage in African witchcraft, right, or Caribbean, it comes from Africa anyway, witchcraft, they will almost always tell you that the spirits demand them to do certain things, and they're afraid not to obey the spirits because of the repercussions. And so and I'm not saying Stan Dubois does juju, I'm just commenting on what Spencer Fearon claimed. If it is the case, then I wonder whether that had something to do with these pre-fight parties on the day of the fight that Stan Dubois apparently has been throwing for his son Daniel. Do you know what I mean? Is that something the spirits have told him to do or whatever? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there as a possibility, right? So, yeah, Joe Jackson. Shout out to Jack for the super chat. He says, big up Hatman, how do you think Usyk and a fight between Joe Frazier would go? I think his style will cause Usyk more problems than Ali. And you know what, Jack, I agree with you. I do think his style would cause him more problems than Ali, because Joe Frazier's head movement was perpetual motion. Constant head movement, constant bobbing, bobbing and weaving, non-stop and non-stop punching. I don't know whether I'd pick Joe Frazier to win, but I think it'd be a real awkward fight. Getting to grips with Frazier's rhythm might be awkward for Usyk, at least for a few rounds. A prime Ali, let me just say this, was more athletic than Oleksandr Usyk. Oleksandr Usyk is very athletic, but a prime Ali was more athletic. A prime Ali was lighter than Usyk, probably by at least 10 pounds. Usyk's like in the low 220s normally. In the Dubois rematch, he was 227, high 220s. Ali in his prime was anywhere between 208 to about 215, 214, in that kind of range. So Ali, despite having the same height and reach as Usyk, was actually lighter in his prime in the 1960s. And he was quicker on his feet, truth be told, but he was nowhere near as good technically as Oleksandr Usyk. So it would be a battle between Ali's kind of better athleticism and what have you, and Usyk's superior technical ability. And one of the reasons that I think Usyk would beat Ali is because of the Carl Mittlenberger fight. If you go back and watch Muhammad Ali versus Carl Mittlenberger, the German southpaw, you'll see that Ali actually had quite a few problems in that fight. He gets the job done in the end, but he finds it very awkward because back then there were very few southpaw fighters in general, but particularly southpaw heavyweights, very, very few of them. So getting southpaw sparring and all this type of stuff was extremely difficult. Maybe if Ali had more experience with southpaws, he'd put in better performances against southpaws. Again, we don't know. Fantasy matchups are always fraught with issues and what ifs and this, that, and the other, which is why I don't base a fighter's all-time greatness primarily on fantasy matchups and who I think would win. I tend to base it more so on their resumes, right? So, yeah, but I reckon I might agree with you as far as Joe Frazier giving Usyk more stylistic issues than Ali. Big up Jack Trussler. Shout out to Mr. Luca for the super chat. He says, can Dubois come back? It all depends on his mindset. I think he can come back, but he might be spooked by Oleksandr Usyk still hanging about the heavyweight division. If Usyk retires, it might give Daniel Dubois kind of a mental boost, if you know what I mean. It's like, imagine there's a school bully or somebody who's your nemesis at school, and one day you find out that he's moved away to a different, town or city or whatever, or he's been expelled. All of a sudden, you're not going to be picking new routes to school anymore to avoid the bully. Like that. And so you're going to be going back to school with like a pep in your step and feeling good about yourself again. You're going to be maybe looking forward to going to school because that bully's gone and your friends are there, and now you can really relax and enjoy yourself rather than being on edge all the time. And I wonder whether Daniel Dubois is going to feel like that at the moment. Like, he doesn't want to go back to school because there's a bully that's bothering him called Oleksandr Usyk. Not that Oleksandr Usyk is a bully type character, but you know what I mean. What he represents is Daniel Dubois' nemesis. He can't get past the guy. So maybe if Usyk retires, we might see Daniel Dubois rejuvenated. Shout out to Mr. Luca. Shout out to Moro's man. He says, Stan Dubois looks sinister to me. Don't trust him. He's certainly an odd guy. Shout out to Workstation. He says, Stan Dubois is secretly a witch doctor and uses dark arts. Uses the dark arts to create Daniel. I mean, that's kind of the inference that Spencer Fearon was making, right? After the, actually, I think it was before the Anthony Joshua fight, he came up with that accusation, wasn't it? And another thing that they say, people who practice, particularly like African witchcraft, is they'll tell you that, or not even just people who practice it, people that are born and raised in Africa will tell you that when someone uses witchcraft to get whatever they want, be it money or a particular person to date or marry, etc., they say that the effects of the witchcraft don't last very long. And that is what Spencer Fearon was saying about Daniel Dubois' success. He says it will be short-lived. Now, perhaps it's just a coincidence. At the end of the day, he lost to Oleksandr Usyk before, lost to him again, so you can't really buy too much into it. But just throwing that out there for the people who want to go down the witchcraft juju angle, right, in terms of analyzing things. Shout out to Patriotic Joe. He says, boxers born January 17, usually good, quite weird. Are there any others that you know born on January 17 other than Oleksandr Usyk and Muhammad Ali? Patriotic Joe? Is there anyone else? Shout out to Goozy. Isaac says, I'm African, but I don't believe there's any magic to get love and money. As in, you don't believe it works? Not believing it that it works, I mean, that's fair enough. But there's a lot of magic that people do because they want to get fame and money, right? That's the purpose of it. And there's loads of witch doctors who will tell you that, yeah, I can get you fame and money if you do this, that, or the other. So that's quite common. People doing it for those reasons. Shout out to KB for the super chat. He says, Usyk should just drop the belts, fight Jake Paul for a bag, then retire. He did say he wanted a show fight. Yes, he did say he wanted a show fight. Originally, the show fight that he was looking at was going to be, what's the guy's name now? The UFC fighter from Brazil. What's his name? What's the UFC fighter from Brazil who Usyk said he wanted to fight? The one who fought Izzy. Alex Pereira, thank you. Yes, Alex Pereira. He said he wanted a show fight against Pereira. Is he still on that or not? We shall see. So, without further ado, let's have a look at some of the potential opponents for Oleksandr Usyk. We've got the heavyweight top 15 with all the sanctioning bodies up here. You can go through each one if you wish and pick out some names. But I'll go with the most popular names, I want to say, that are being mentioned by boxing fans. So the first one would have to be Joseph Parker, 36-3. He is the interim champion, as you can see here, with the WBO. He's been waiting for his chance. He's very frustrated. Frank Warren, post Usyk Dubois 2, is claiming that Joseph Parker is next in line. Time and time again, he's saying Joseph Parker's going to get his shot. So Frank Warren really needs to put his money where his mouth is. And here's the difficulty for Frank Warren, is that he has so many heavyweights. Again, if we go back to the rankings, the guys who are knocking on the door for title shots are all Frank Warren fighters other than Michael Hunter, right? So Derek Chisora, who's number 2 with the IBF, is a Frank Warren fighter. Kubrat Pulev is regular champion. Okay, he's not with Frank Warren, but Fabio Wardley is interim champion with the WBA, Frank Warren fighter. Michael Hunter is number 1 contender with the WBA, Frank Warren fighter. Agit Kabayel, interim champion with the WBC, Frank Warren fighter. Lawrence Okolie, number 1 with the WBC, Frank Warren fighter. Moses Itauma, Number one with the WBO, Frank Warren fighter. Joseph Parker, of course, we've spoken about him, interim champion with the WBO. That's a Frank Warren fighter. And even even Filip Hrgović, who's number two with the WBO, is a Frank Warren fighter. How can one promoter keep all of these heavyweights happy who are knocking on the door for title shots? It's very difficult. Very, very difficult. So, the management of all these fighters are going to be hassling Frank Warren and George Warren every damn day. Some of them might even be trying to put legal pressure on Frank Warren. Like, you promised us this, you promised us that. Do you know what I mean? So there is, I guess you could say, a negative side to signing so many heavyweights, is you've got to actually fulfill your contractual obligations to these heavyweights. And Joseph Parker, when I saw him on Simon Jordan's podcast the other day, post Usyk Dubois 2, he was quite obviously frustrated. Very, very frustrated with the lack of activity. He says he wants to fight Oleksandr Usyk next, but he did express some concern over the fact he's been so inactive. He said the reason that Usyk is able to produce good form isn't just because of the fact he's a consummate professional, but also because he's been relatively active, relative compared to Joseph Parker, right? So, what do you guys think about Parker? Make your case in the live chat. Murrow's man says, witchcraft is irrelevant. It won't stop Ivan. Ivan, the name of Oleksandr Usyk's looping left hand. I like the way he named it Ivan. Shout out to Bobs for the super chat. He says, Talk Sport Brigade have lost the plot. Usyk has seriously deteriorated. He's now relying on his defensive skills to bang. We're not living in 2018 now. I agree with you. I think Usyk has deteriorated. But he's so good technically, as you say, that he's still able to not only get through these fights, but in the case of the Daniel Dubois rematch, destroy Daniel Dubois. But that's not the same Usyk who fought AJ the first time. He's not as quick. He's not as mobile. He doesn't throw as many punches. He doesn't move his head as consistently. I mean, there were moments there in that Dubois rematch where Usyk was actually stood still with his guard up, not moving at all, not moving his feet, not moving his upper body, nothing. And he let Dubois get some shots off. Now, some people could interpret that as, well, Usyk was just so confident and he wanted to draw Daniel Dubois in and hit. But I don't buy it. I saw some of True Geordie's commentary, the live stream that he did, the live watch along with him and his boys. It was very funny, actually. The way they reacted when Usyk got the knockout. But True Geordie was saying throughout the fight, the same thing I observed when I was doing my live stream. Usyk looks old to me. He looks slow compared to how he's not slow, but slower than he used to look. So I can see the deterioration there. So shout out to Bobs for the super chat. He is relying on his defensive skills. Shout out to Corey King. He says, big fan, been watching for 10 years from Newcastle. Shout out to the Northeast crew. Tyneside. Big up Corey King. Shout out to Green Entity. He says, fantasy matchup, Prime Dillian Whyte versus Prime Riddick Bowe. Prime Riddick Bowe all day. I mean, okay, Riddick Bowe didn't fight that many punchers. Come to think of it, he fought maybe, 2 punchers? Andrew Galotta and Jorge Luis Gonzalez. Neither one of them were like elite punchers, but both guys could bang a bit. They were the only 2 punches that Riddick Bowe fought, and so I was never completely convinced by Bowe's chin. He didn't have a bad chin, but he never fought the kind of ferocious punches that Lennox Lewis did. He never fought Mike Tyson, obviously. The likes of Razor Ruddock, Shannon Briggs could really bang, David Tua. Lewis fought a lot of real big punches, whereas Riddick Bowe didn't. So my only reservation regarding Riddick Bowe against Dillian Whyte is, what if Dillian Whyte lands that big left hook? And it is easy to kind of think of the current version of Dillian Whyte, because the Dillian Whyte who fought Anthony Joshua and the Dillian Whyte who fought Chisora twice could take a much better shot than the Dillian Whyte of today. So we do have to factor that in as well. But I think Riddick Bowe would have beaten Dillian Whyte. I think They're a similar height. Well, actually, Riddick Bowe, I want to say, is 2 inches taller. Dillian Whyte's probably closer to 6'3" than his stated 6'4". Riddick Bowe was like a legit 6'5". Bowe was a very fluid boxer, could punch. Great jab. Ferocious, you know. His two weaknesses, certainly his defense was poor, Riddick Bowe. And maybe his chin, I don't want to say his chin was bad. It might have been an average chin. I don't think Riddick Bowe's chin was any better than Lennox Lewis's chin, to be honest. It's just that, as I say, Lewis fought far more big punches than Riddick Bowe did. But yeah, I'd pick Riddick Bowe, long story short. Shout out to Green Entity. Shout out to Matt for the super chat. He says, why is the WBO now Oriental heavy on BoxRec? Well, that's one of their secondary or tertiary belts, right? They've got the WBO world, super champion, or do they still have super champions? No, I don't think the WBO have super champions anymore, but they've got the WBO world champion, then they've got Oriental and Pacific and God knows what other weird belts they have. But yeah, shout out to Matt for the super chat. So Joseph Parker is somebody who people are really making a case for. He's interim champion. He needs to get his shot. He's been waiting the longest, really. And if there's any justice in boxing, which there very rarely is, he will be the next guy to fight Oleksandr Usyk, or at least challenge for a world heavyweight title. Because, Usyk might get stripped or choose to vacate. Shout out to Belt Loops Matter. He says, I think Usyk is getting too much credit for what he's done at heavyweight so far. The guys he has beaten are good, but not all-time great fighters. Okay, I'm going to push back on that a little bit. Because in any heavyweight era, all you can do is beat the best that are around at the time. That's all you can do. Is Mike Tyson an all-time great? Because he beat the best that were around during the mid to late 1980s, but none of them were really great fighters, were they? Other than Larry Holmes, but Holmes was past his best, and he took the fight on very short notice. Mike Tyson didn't beat any greats, did he? But a lot of people still rate Mike Tyson as an all-time great. Do you know what I mean? If you look at, for example, Muhammad Ali, he beat Sonny Liston. Sonny Liston didn't have a load of heavyweight title defenses. Yes, he was an avoided champion, an avoided contender for a long time. Sonny Liston was like the boogeyman in the heavyweight division who Patterson was kept away from for a long time. D'Amato didn't want Patterson to fight him because he knew what was going to happen. Eventually, Patterson got his way because he felt like a fraud of a champion being kept away from Liston. Eventually fought him and got knocked out in the first round twice. But yeah, Liston didn't have some long heavyweight title reign, did he? He fought Floyd Patterson, fought him again. I'm not sure if there was anyone in between, but then he fought Cassius Clay as he was then and got beat. But yet people still consider Sonny Liston to be an all-time great. Do you know what I mean? And that's one of Muhammad Ali's best wins, his signature wins. Then he went throughout the 1960s. Did he beat any greats in the 60s? Floyd Patterson was a former champion, but he was no top 10 heavyweight of all time at all. He beat Joe Frazier. Okay, Joe Frazier did have a few title defenses under his belt. He was a solid champion. He was doing his thing. Ali lost to him the first time. Beat Frazier when he wasn't champion in their rematch over 12 rounds. Lost to Ken Norton, came back, beat Ken Norton. Was Ken Norton a great fighter? He was a tough contender, but was he an all-time great? Do you know what I mean? Then he beats George Foreman. Okay, George Foreman you could say is an all-time great. He didn't have a load of, in my opinion, he didn't have a load of world title defenses, George Foreman. But he demolished Joe Frazier, who was a very good champion. He demolished Ken Norton. Then he had that fight with Joe Roman. That was actually in between that was actually his first defense. Beat Frazier, then knocked out Joe Roman, then knocked out Ken Norton. Then he went into the Ali fight and lost to Ali. But he did beat a bunch of other contenders in the 1970s, the likes of Ron Lyle and what have you. And then eventually lost to Jimmy Young. But it's when he came back in the late 80s that he really solidified his position as an all-time great because, yeah, he unsuccessfully challenged the likes of Evander Holyfield and Tommy Morrison for the heavyweight title, but eventually knocked out Michael Moore at the age of 45 to become the oldest heavyweight champion in history, and he still holds that record. So for me, you really have to, if it wasn't for George Foreman's second career, how great would you really say he was? Do you know what I mean? In terms of resume, what he achieved. It's because he came back and became the oldest heavyweight champion in history. That's when, for my money, you have to put him in there as an all-time great, because he achieved, when you combine the two careers he had. So yeah, I think Usyk has achieved fantastic things. Chisora's a rough, tough fringe contender. Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, Daniel Dubois were three of the top guys, three champions when Oleksandr Usyk beat him. I think he needs to get a lot of credit, but it depends what you mean by too much credit. If you mean too much credit, as far as people saying, okay, he's the greatest of all time now because he beat those three guys, I would agree that's kind of a bit over the top if we're basing it on resume. I would agree with that. Yeah, I would agree with that bit. But I think the fighters that Usyk has beaten are very good. That's basically the point I'm making. I think they are good fighters. I think this is a strong heavyweight era. I don't think it's a weak era at all. So yeah, shout out to Belt Loops Matter. Thank you for the super chat. Shout out to Ocean Blue. He says, to me, Usyk's speed of mind and speed of body looked out of sync at times. I definitely see deterioration. So do I. I see deterioration with Oleksandr Usyk. But when you have that technical ability, when you do everything so correctly, the deterioration is not going to show to the untrained eye as quickly as it would if you were a Muhammad Ali or a Roy Jones who relied more so on athleticism than technique. Shout out to Black Dynamite for the super chat. He says, can anyone beat Usyk the way Breedis almost did? Also, Jake Paul is born on January 7th. Oh, for real? I had no idea Jake Paul was born on January 17th. That's crazy. He says he might be the chosen one to defeat Usyk. Man, I hope not. Oh my days. Is Jake Paul actually born on January 17th? I'm going to look that up. Shout out to Black Dynamite. Ibrahim says, young George Foreman versus Mike Tyson, who wins? Mike Tyson, in my opinion. I've been asked that question many times in the past, and I've always said, I think Mike Tyson beats a prime George Foreman. Yeah, prime for prime, I got Mike Tyson. Remember, they're the same weight. George Foreman's like 6'3.5". Mike Tyson, 5'10", but they weigh the same. High 2 teens to low 220s. George Foreman, towards the back end of the 70s, was weighing maybe in the low 230s for a couple of fights, high 220s. But for his most significant wins, like when he fought Ken Norton, Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, he was within the same weight range as Mike Tyson. And so Mike Tyson was much more powerful than Joe Frazier, didn't throw as many punches as Frazier, definitely not. Didn't have the stamina of Frazier, but he was far more explosive, had a better chin, was physically stronger, and Foreman was wide open for the shots that Mike Tyson likes to throw. I mean, I think personally Mike Tyson would have won that fight, but who knows, man? It's just my opinion. If somebody invents a time machine one day and sends a prime Mike Tyson back to fight George Foreman in the 70s, maybe I'll be proved completely wrong. But that's just my take on it. Shout out to Belt Loops Matter. He says, I think Prime Ali does far better versus Usyk than either AJ or Fury did because of their similar speed, athleticism, and coordination. Current heavyweights right now are slow. And I hear that argument. I definitely hear that argument. Yeah, Ali, I want to say, is a better athlete than Usyk. Usyk is a great athlete, but Ali was faster, a bit lighter, you know, quicker on his feet and stuff like that. But I just can't get over the technical superiority for me that Usyk has over Ali. And again, if you go watch that Carl Mittlenberger fight, the problems that Ali had against a very basic German southpaw, if he's having them kind of issues against Mittlenberger, what's he going to have against Usyk? So I hear you, but for whatever my opinion is worth, I would pick Usyk in a fantasy matchup against Ali based on styles. But Yeah, that's just me. Shout out to Mitchell. I nearly said Michael. Mitchell Watson for the super chat. He says, forget just Usyk being the GOAT. Conversation at heavyweight. If we take in his whole pro career, cruiserweight heavy, where would you rank him in the all-time list, taking that into account? Yeah, it's very difficult with pound-for-pound all-time lists, because pound-for-pound all-time lists are very abstract. You have to factor in, if you want to compare, for example, Floyd Mayweather to Muhammad Ali. If you're comparing them in a fantasy matchup, how tall do you make Ali? How tall do you make Mayweather? You know, all that kind of thing. So I tend not to get into fantasy matchup comparisons as far as pound for pound, but resume wise, which I think is what you're alluding to here, Usyk wouldn't crack the top 10 pound for pound fighters of all time in terms of resume. He wouldn't crack the top 10, I don't think, because you've got the likes of Manny Pacquiao, who's been world champion in how many different weight classes? Do you know what I mean? You got the Sugar Ray Robinsons. I mean, you got countless fighters in the lower weight divisions who, again, became champion in so many different weight classes and beat great fighters along the way. Sugar Ray Leonard even. Roberto Duran was an incredible fighter. I mean, Roberto Duran these days is actually more famous for fights outside of his natural weight division than the fights he had inside his natural weight division. Roberto Duran was a natural lightweight. One of the greatest lightweights in history, Roberto Duran. His lightweight run was spectacular. But he's not most famous for that. He's most famous for when he moved up through the weight classes, when he fought Davey Moore, for example. I think that was at Madison Square Garden. It was somewhere in New York. He mashed up Davey Moore. He beat Ray Leonard in the first fight. He had a very competitive fight with Marvin Hagler for the middleweight title. He beat Iran Barkley later on for the middle. Do you know what I mean? He's more well known for those fights, which again shows his incredible greatness. When really and truly, this guy was a lightweight. He was basically an ill-disciplined lightweight that had such skills and tenacity and heavy hands that he was able to go up through the weight classes and even become a world champion at middleweight against the huge middleweight in Iran Barkley, who later on in his career fought a heavyweight. Do you know what I mean? So if we're comparing Usyk in terms of pound for pound greatest of all time, I don't think he cracked the top 10 of all time. There have been so many fighters in so many different eras. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, but heavyweight, different story. But including all weight classes, it's more difficult. It's more difficult. Although, saying all that, because Usyk has fought at heavyweight with huge weight disadvantages, you could say, well, hang on, that should count as jumping up several weight classes. Do you know what I mean? That should count as like jumping up 3 or 4 weight classes because he's fighting the likes of Tyson Fury, who's 40 pounds heavier than him, AJ, who's like 20 pounds. Do you know what I mean? So you can factor that in as well. Shout out to Mitchell Watson, though, for the super chat. Thank you. Much appreciated. Shout out to Corey King for the super chat. He says, Hatman, who, if anybody from this era or the previous, could be the next George Foreman, coming back as a pensioner and winning the title? Okay, that's an interesting question. Who could be the next George Foreman? In fact, let's get the heavyweight rankings up here. Who could be the next George Foreman? If Martin Okolie hadn't been chinned in 2 rounds by Joseph Parker, let's say Martin Okolie had an iron jaw, you wouldn't dismiss the possibility of Okolie maybe coming back later on in his career if the heavyweight division is sufficiently weak and if there's a vulnerable champion who's a bit chinny, like Michael Moorer was always very chinny. Maybe someone like Martin Okolie. He's probably the closest thing stylistically to a Foreman that we've got right now. Joe Joyce is pretty much done. And I don't think Joyce hits hard enough one punch to come back and do something like that. And I think he's taken too much punishment. And funny enough, other people have mentioned this. Martin Okolie is actually a vegetarian. How bizarre is that? This guy must be eating fish and chips. Oh, God no, not fish and chips. I'm not talking about that's not vegetarian, but chips, right? This guy must be eating chips every flipping day. Apparently he eats loads of fufu, which is like an African, West African, and I guess they eat it in Central Africa, in Congo as well. I didn't realize that. I've always known it as a West African thing. Yeah, maybe he's just eating way too much fufu and other fried foods and probably chocolate and all sorts of other stuff because he's a vegetarian. And disturbingly, there was an interview, I think it was uploaded earlier on today, where Derek Chisora basically accosts Martin Okolie, and he tells him, you need to get in shape, you need to stop, overeating and this, that, and the other. And Martin Okolie turns around to him and says, I've got a family. And I'm like, what? This guy's making excuses for being fat as a pig, because he was fat clearly in the interview that he was doing with Chisora when Chisora accosted him. He was clearly overweight and fat. And his excuse was, I've got a family. Well, hang on, Derek Chisora's got a family. Loads of fighters have got families and they don't turn up looking like a flipping hippopotamus. So Martin Okolie might have a problem. Do you know what I mean? He might have like some type of food addiction or sugar addiction or something like that, because to be coming out with that as an excuse, some joke business. That's some joke business, bro. Yeah, I've got a family and therefore, that's not what you want to hear from him. Andy Ruiz 2.0 says Cal. Yeah, could well be. All right, so the next potential opponent for Oleksandr Usyk is this man on screen right now, Agit Kabayel. We've talked about Joseph Parker. He's probably the most deserving right now. The second most deserving, perhaps in the consensus among boxing fans in the boxing fraternity, would be Agit Kabayel. I've seen quite a few people say that they think Kabayel has the best chance of beating Oleksandr Usyk out of any fighter around right now. They might be right. Although there's a couple of other guys who I would give a good chance as well. Maybe a slightly better chance, in my opinion, than Agit Kabayel. But I think Kabayel's got a decent shot because he is a thinking fighter. He's clever. He's still relatively young. He's got that body shot thing going for him. He's very, very good at going to people's body and taking the fight out of them. But I've said this many times, going to the body against a side-on mobile southpaw, not Zhang. Zhang's a potted plant and he fights relatively square on at times, so you can still get to the body. Getting to Usyk's body will be far more difficult. And while you're trying to go to his body, he's going to be pinging you with left hands and right hands and then moving off to the side and all sorts of stuff. So it's a completely different kettle of fish trying to get to Usyk's body compared with a Zheli Zhang. But still, I'd be intrigued to see the fight and see if Agit Kabayel can surprise us once more, because he surprised me more than a couple of times at this stage. So, what do you guys think about Agit Kabayel's chances against Oleksandr Usyk? That's right, Jelly Mold says Kabayel is the real body snatcher. Is there anyone here that would actually pick Kabayel over Usyk? Is anyone bold enough to make that prediction? Danny says Usyk schools Kabayel. Would anyone actually pick Kabayel? Sean says Kabayel gets smoked. All right. Okay, Jerry Berry says he would pick Kabayel. Morozman says Kabayel is good, but Usyk all day. Body shots won't matter when he's eating Ivan. Yeah, we're all going to have a lot of fun with this Ivan thing now. We're all going to have a lot of fun with Ivan. Tyson Fury tasted Ivan many, many times. Anthony Joshua tasted Ivan. Anyone else would pick Kabayel over Oleksandr Usyk? Ryan Emus says Kabayel, young, smart, very aggressive. Bilal says Kabayel looks good against these huge guys. Usyk is too coordinated and mobile to be pinned down. Even Chisora couldn't, and he's a pressure fighter. Okay. That's a fair point, but this is a slower, older version of Usyk than the one who fought Chisora, in my opinion. Certainly heavier. And in fact, that might be one of the reasons that Usyk was, to my eyes, slower, is because he was heavier. His body also looked older with the weight, you know? Jackhammer says Agit dark horse. K-Shot says I wouldn't write off Kabayel, but pick him, probably not. Jay Norwood says Wilder fight than done. I don't think the Wilder fight does anything for him. Wilder is completely shot. I don't see any reason he should be fighting Deontay Wilder. Matt B says, Hatman, did Agit, really win against Chisora? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. It wasn't his most exciting performance, but he did really win against Chisora. President Brush says, why for tasting Ivan? Yeah, why for that? Pause. In fact, there was a crazy video title. What was the video title I'm thinking of now? Oh yeah, I think it was like Talk Sport or something. And the video title was Usyk made Dubois swallow it. It was a bag of people saying, pause. You got to put a massive pause on. In fact, I think it was somebody in my Element group who posted the thumbnail from that Talk Sport video title. Usyk made Dubois swallow it. For those who are not from the UK, swallow it is kind of a old saying for quitting. So it means basically to swallow your pride and quit. Yeah, that's why people say swallow it. You're swallowing your pride and quitting, but they shorten it to swallow it. So yeah, in the context of that thumbnail, it sounds crazy. Usyk made Dubois swallow it. Yeah, Diddy must be loving that thumbnail. Must be loving that video title. Shout out to Mitchell Watson for the super chat. He says, no way Martin Okolie is a vegetarian. Look at the bloody size of him. Kabayel gives Usyk his toughest fight of his career, in my opinion, since Breedis. And Breedis gave him a very, very tough fight. The Breedis fight was one of the few fights, maybe the only fight in Usyk's career, where Usyk was still being given loads of trouble in the championship rounds. Normally, Usyk has got you figured out and you're basically surviving in the championship rounds if you've made it that far. But against Breedis, it was like hotly contested right up until the 12th. So Breedis really, really pushed Oleksandr Usyk to the wire. But as I understand it, Usyk changed a lot of things about his training team after the Breedis fight because he didn't like how close it was. But yeah, Kabayel perhaps will give Usyk a tough fight. We'll see if Usyk keeps hold of the belt necessary to have Kabayel be a mandatory. And Martin Okolie being a vegetarian, it is hard to believe, isn't it? The amount of chips this guy must be eating. Chips, bread, fufu, God knows what else. Crisps. Washing it down with iron brewing. God knows what Martin Okolie's eating and drinking. Shout out to Mitchell Watson for the super chat. All right, so we can move on then from Agit Kabayel to another possible opponent for Oleksandr Usyk, and that would be a guy who gave him one of his more difficult nights when he was cruiserweight champion, and that is Michael Hunter. Any of you guys remember the Michael Hunter fight? Now, Michael Hunter, if you look at the rankings here, is ranked number 1 with the WBA, but he is behind Kubrat Pulev and Fabio Wardley. Fabio Wardley's interim, Kubrat Pulev is regular, but last I checked, Hunter's supposed to fight Kubrat Pulev, and the winner obviously will be regular champion. I think that is, in fact, I don't even know whether that's a higher status with the WBA than interim champion. I'm not even sure, because this regular stuff is so weird and difficult to understand. But he might be on the same level in terms of pecking order for a shot at Usyk as Fabio Wardley if Michael Hunter beats Kubrat Pulev. And I'd expect him to beat Kubrat Pulev. And remember, Don King won the purse bid, so that fight is going to be in the United States, not in Kubrat Pulev's home country of Bulgaria. So you wouldn't imagine Pulev is going to be getting any favors on the cards. So that's a fight I would expect Michael Hunter to win. Be that as it may, Michael Hunter is at a very disappointing career. He comes from a boxing family. His dad was a fringe contender in the 1990s. A tough guy, Michael Hunter Sr. And so he was raised to be a boxer. He showed some early promise. He obviously took the unbeaten record of Martin Okolie at York Hall, stopped him in the final round. That was a very good performance that night. He was subsequently signed by Matchroom. He beat the likes of Sergey Kuzmin and beat him well. He had a draw with Alexander Povetkin, which I think it certainly wasn't a robbery, but I do feel like he just edged that fight. Although he gassed in the second half. He really tried to knock Povetkin out in that fight, and it backfired. But anyway, he was then supposed to fight Filip Hrgović in a final eliminator, I want to say for the IBF. Eddie Hearn won the purse bid, and Michael Hunter, rather than going through with that fight, decided to leave Eddie Hearn and sign with Triller. And basically, it's all been downhill from there. He had a rematch with a guy called, in fact, I'm going to need to call on you guys in the live chat again to jog my memory. What's the journeyman who Michael Hunter had a draw with? And it was really controversial because Hunter should have lost that fight. What's the guy's name? Southpaw. Got stopped in 2 rounds by Jared Anderson. Thank you, Jerry Forrest. Yes, Jerry Forrest. So, thank you, Mitchell Watson. Yeah, Jerry Forrest is a guy that Michael Hunter actually fought earlier on in his career and beat comfortably. He went into the rematch with Jerry Forrest on Triller and struggled, went absolute life and death with Jerry Forrest. Was it a combination of Michael Hunter underestimating Forrest because he'd beaten him comfortably previously and Forrest also improving? Who knows? But he went life and death. He thought that Triller was going to be the key for him to, reach fame and fortune. But in addition to turning his back on Matchroom, running away from Matchroom and stuff like that, and trying to get the bag with Triller, he also split up with his longtime manager and trainer, Hasim Rahman. And for me, he's never been in the same kind of shape since he left Rahman. And his performances have not been as impressive since he left Hasim Rahman. So I don't think it was just the change of promoter and trying to basically go down the independent route. It was also not having the guidance of Hasim Rahman anymore as his manager and coach. Maybe not having the discipline of Hasim Rahman as his manager and coach. Do you know what I mean? So, Michael Hunter, if he'd taken his career more seriously, if he'd taken his craft more seriously, an Oleksandr Usyk rematch might actually be quite interesting at heavyweight. He's got a good boxing brain. He's got the potential there. He showed in that first fight with Usyk that he can hang with him. If you got that fight still on YouTube, go watch it. Michael Hunter's given Usyk a lot of problems through the first 6 rounds. A lot of problems. But Usyk did... That's actually a typical Usyk fight. It was somewhat similar to the Fury fight, actually. Although, obviously, Fury's a much bigger fighter than Michael Hunter. But Hunter had some success in the first half. Same way that Fury did. But in the back end of the fight, Usyk just took over. And Michael Hunter was extremely tough, but also maybe fortunate to survive the 12th, because he was out of it in that final round against Oleksandr Usyk. He was in all sorts of trouble. all sorts of trouble late on in that fight. But yeah, Michael Hunter definitely has the skills. If only this guy could get himself in shape. It's probably too late for him because he hasn't looked after himself. I think he is actually a year younger. Yeah, he's a year younger than Oleksandr Usyk at 37. But I think Oleksandr Usyk's a lot more well-preserved. And as other people have said, Michael Hunter has regressed. He's deteriorated to a far greater extent than Oleksandr Usyk has. Nevertheless, if he does fight and beat Kubrat Pulev, he's somebody that might actually get a shot. Although it'll be another rematch for Oleksandr Usyk. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's tired of seeing him fight rematches. Especially unnecessary rematches because there was no controversy really in the first fights. So Michael Hunter's a possibility. Another possibility for Oleksandr Usyk next would be Lawrence Okolie. Now this will not be a popular one because Lawrence Okolie has a... Shout out to Jay Silver for his super chat. He says, Opetaia would give Usyk the most problems in my opinion. Opetaia has the athleticism. He's got the viciousness. He's got the power. He's got very good speed. Opetaia is probably quicker than Usyk at this stage. But Opetaia has been hurt in at least one fight recently. And he's hot-headed. He's more upright than Usyk. He doesn't have Usyk's head movement. Usyk is a much better technical fighter than Opetaia. I can see where people are coming from. I can see the attributes that Opetaia has that could be problematic for Usyk. I can definitely see them. And you're not necessarily saying that Opetaia would win the fight, Jay Silver, I guess. You're just saying he'll give him the most problems. Yeah, I can see him giving him problems. But I would still pick Usyk to win even now. Because he's technically superior to Opetaia. And what happens when Usyk actually hits Opetaia clean? I think he'll hurt Opetaia if he catches him clean. And Usyk tends to catch people clean. He's very accurate. Okay, Genius says Opetaia is a more interesting fight than watching Usyk just beat Parker and Kabayel in second gear. I hear you. I hear you. Because Opetaia has that speed, that explosiveness. A greater level of speed and explosiveness and viciousness than Kabayel or Parker, particularly Parker. So I understand why people see it as more interesting. Because Opetaia is a killer. He's fast, he's athletic. He's quick on his feet. A shout out to Corey King. He says, I was at Wembley on Saturday with my dad. I'm not joking when I say he fell asleep during the Okolie fight. He has insomnia and sleep apnea. Okay. Ram says Okolie is a dark horse at heavyweight. You know what? I kind of half agree with you. One of the reasons I think Okolie is a dark horse at heavyweight is because everyone has written him off as an octopus, a boring fighter, so on and so forth, right? But if you actually think about it in the cold light of day, he beat Kevin Lerena more comfortably, and he did it with one arm. We now know he had a torn bicep, badly torn bicep, so he did it with one arm, one hand. He beat Kevin Lerena more comfortably than anybody. Yes, Daniel Dubois stopped Kevin Lerena early in the fight, but that was after coming off the floor several times. Justice Hooney beat Kevin Lerena, but that was a rough fight for Justice Hooney. A real rough fight. He was badly hurt in that fight. Lawrence Okolie beat Lerena at a canter with one arm. So I do think because people are kind of underplaying is not the right word, but they're not seeing that the attributes he has, which could cause other heavyweights real problems. Yeah? Because he didn't lose a round against Kevin Lerena. I think one of the judges had him losing one round. So yeah, I think he is a dark horse at heavyweight, to be honest. Although, on the flip side, I don't think Okolie is going to be able to take a serious heavyweight punch. There was times there against Lerena where he got clipped and he looked wobbly to me. momentarily. Do you know what I mean? So I don't think when one of these big heavyweights cracks him on the chin, he's going to be able to take it. But maybe they won't be able to take his shots, right, if he cracks him clean. Because Kevin Lerena never really got caught clean by the Okolie right hand, but he was so intimidated by the power that he was just frozen on the outside. He wouldn't take a chance to get close because the power was so intimidating. So you're going to see more ambitious fighters get hit more flush with that Okolie right hand. And I think that's where people will be surprised by some of the results Okolie might get in the years to come. So, yeah. A shout out to Black Dynamite. He says, can anyone beat Usyk the way Lopez beat Lomachenko? I don't think so. Not right now. I don't think there's anyone out there right now who can pull off those kind of tactics. The only person theoretically in my head might be somebody like in fact, no, I don't think he could do it either. I was going to say Bakadir Jalilov, but again, two southpaws, it wouldn't really be the same dynamic. And is Jalilov even serious about fighting as a professional? I don't know. But if we go back to the heavyweight rankings for a second, is there anyone you can pick out who you think could do a similar job to Usyk that Lopez did to Lomachenko? See, the problem with trying to do something like that to Usyk is Usyk has got more tenacity than Lomachenko. Usyk refuses to be frozen on the outside because somebody's a big puncher. He refuses. This is one of the reasons that I totally rejected the comparison between Oleksandr Usyk and Vladimir Klitschko. This is why Don Charles and his son Abdi got their mind games totally wrong with Oleksandr Usyk, thinking that if they... See, the reason that Don Charles was having a go at Usyk's faith, you know, questioning his faith, calling him a cheat, questioning his integrity, the reason that they went down that road to try and get under Usyk's skin is because they were basically revealing that's what will get under their skin. Yeah? Don Charles and his son are very emotional people. Yeah, they're very touchy, emotional people. Those kind of tactics, questioning Don Charles' faith, questioning Don Charles' integrity, would get to him. So what Don Charles and his son did is think to themselves, well, that would upset us, so let's inflict that upon Usyk. Well, it's not going to work because Usyk's not like you. Right? Usyk, and this just shows their lack of intelligence, their lack of understanding of the psychology of Usyk and where he's at in his career. Totally different to many other fighters. Those are the kind of tactics, right? Questioning the faith and calling somebody a cheater and questioning their integrity. Those kind of tactics will work against a very emotional fighter or a very green fighter. But a guy like Usyk, who's been there, seen it, and done it, he isn't like a Vladimir Klitschko who needs order in order to feel comfortable. You know, who needs to have everything all his own way, so on and so forth. No, Usyk is absolutely the polar opposite of that. This is a guy who's used to fighting in the other fighter's backyard. He's not used to having things all his own way. He's not used to being in his comfort zone. He's used to being outside of his comfort zone. Totally different psychology to Vladimir Klitschko. He's not the one, you know, constantly fighting in the same country, putting spongy canvases down, making it so that you have to wear the same gloves that he wears, and then sending you ill-fitting gloves, and you're not allowed. These are all the things that Vladimir Klitschko used to do to make himself feel comfortable enough to go in the ring and fight. He'd usually have massive physical advantages over his opponents, but then he would still excessively hold and lean on and all this type of stuff. And the referees would barely take points off him. So his mindset, his personality type, totally different to Usyk. Nothing. Vladimir Klitschko really was like a bully type personality. Usyk is the antithesis of it. Usyk is the kind of person who actually gets motivated by facing bullies. That's the kind of guy he is. Because he's always been the smaller guy. He's always been the lighter punching guy. Even going back to his amateur days, or when he fought in the WSB, he was up at super heavyweight, right? Fighting the likes of Joe Joyce. Usyk is a guy that lives for the challenge of taking on the big bully. He lives for the challenge of taking on the other guy in his backyard. He lives for the challenge of taking on the younger guy who hits harder. That's his personality type, yeah? The worst thing you can do with a guy like that is try to antagonize him, because you're just giving him motivation. You're giving him exactly what he wants, yeah? The best way, in my opinion, to approach Usyk is to try and lull him into a full sense of security. Be super nice, be super meek and mild in the run-up to the fight, and hope that he takes his eye off the ball. Yeah? Because by being antagonistic, that is the worst thing you can do. Holyfield had a similar mentality to Usyk, being a smaller man. Yeah? When Holyfield was in the amateurs, he's like this country boy, mama's boy, all this type of stuff from, Alabama. And these other guys like Ricky Womack was a street kid. Yeah, tough guy in the amateurs, intimidated a lot of people. So many other young fighters were scared of him. And Holyfield wanted to prove himself against Ricky Womack, which he did. They had some great fights. And the same thing happened with Mike Tyson when they were in the Olympic box offs. Yeah, Holyfield sparred with Mike Tyson, and it was an absolute war for a round. They only let them spar one round because it was too vicious. Holyfield at the time was competing at light heavyweight. All right, so he was like 25 pounds lighter than Mike Tyson, and yet he more than held his own, according to people who observed it, despite the fact he was much lighter than Mike Tyson was. So Holyfield was motivated by facing the big, bad, tough bully. That's what motivated him. Fighting in, a situation where you're expected to lose, being the underdog. That's what brought the best out of him. When he fought Riddick Bowe in the rematch, everybody writ him off. He rose to the occasion. When he fought big, bad Mike Tyson, Holyfield was supposed to be finished. He rose to the occasion. You see what I'm saying? Those are the things that motivated him to get the best out of him. Holyfield was at his worst when he was expected to win, when everyone thought it would be a foregone conclusion in Holyfield. That's when Holyfield would underperform. Now, Usyk is a lot more consistent than Holyfield, but still, those are the kind of mind games you need to be trying against Usyk, especially at this stage of his career when he's achieved everything. I said this in a video I uploaded earlier on today. I compared Usyk to a mountaineer. Imagine if you've conquered Everest and K2 and all the biggest, most dangerous mountains. Can you really get the same level of motivation to then go climb Ben Nevis or Mount Snowdon? Do you know what I mean? When you've conquered the biggest, most dangerous mountains in the world, how can you still get up for climbing, again, Snowdon? So that would be the challenge for Usyk now, is where does he continue to find motivation? And the guy's a pure athlete. He's always going to be in shape. But mentally, he might not be as switched on. He might not have as much adrenaline. He might not be as edgy for every fight, depending on who the opponent is. So anyway, long explanation, but I'm sure you get what I'm saying here. Yeah, that was based on Black Dynamite's super chat where he said, can anyone beat Usyk the way Lopez beat Lomachenko? And I guess the short answer should be, I don't think so. Because Usyk is just far too tenacious to beat him like that. And I don't think there's anybody with that type of ability to play the Lopez in the heavyweight division right now. Shout out to Mitchell Watson for the super chat. He says, Johnny Fisher, top 15 in the WBO, or am I on drugs? In fact, let me check that. Where are we at? Johnny Fisher. Yeah, he is at number 15. That's crazy. That's crazy. So Eddie Hearn must have lobbied the WBO to have him ranked that high. I mean, where's Dave Allen? How come Dave Allen's not in the top 15, but Johnny Fisher is? Bear in mind, Eddie Hearn represents Johnny Fisher, represents Dave Allen as well. That's crazy. So whoever put Johnny Fisher in the top 15, can we assume they're on drugs? That's a madness. That's a sharp eye there, Mitchell Watson. Shout out. A big up someone for the super chat. He says, I listen to your old vids while working. I may have heard you wrong, but did you say it was the Witherspoon fight that convinced you Usyk could make it at heavyweight? I can't remember, to be fair. I can't remember. I actually can't remember. But there was something that convinced me he could make it at heavyweight. Because when he was fighting at cruiserweight, I was unconvinced for a while. I was like, no, I think he's too small and this and that. But yeah, there was a point. It might have been the Witherspoon fight. I'm not sure why. I'd have to go back and watch the Witherspoon fight to understand why I said that, if I did say it. But something happened between maybe the Bellew fight and the Chisora fight that convinced me that he was going to be successful. That convinced me he was going to knock off at least one of the big names. At the time, the big names were AJ, Fury, and Wilder. And I was predicting he's going to beat at least one of them. At least one of them, he's going to take him down. But there was something about that period of his career where it was like a eureka moment. And I was like, no. He's actually going to do it. He's actually got it. But I can't remember specifically what it was. So shout out to someone for the super chat. All right, so I'm gonna make sure I haven't missed any super chats. So yeah, let's move on to the next potential opponent then, since people don't want to talk about Lawrence Okolie. And by the way, Lawrence Okolie versus Usyk, I see Usyk beating Okolie all day long. Derek Chisora, I don't want to see Derek Chisora fight Usyk again. Chisora put in one of the best performances of his career when he fought Oleksandr Usyk. He got down to a relatively light weight. He was as fit as he could possibly be. He was a much fresher version of himself back then. It was, 2020? 5 years ago? Or 2021? 4 years ago when Derek Chisora fought Oleksandr Usyk. I don't think Chisora can fight with that intensity anymore. He still had more speed back then. And at the end of the day, a fresher version of Derek Chisora gave Usyk hell for 3-4 rounds? Had some success in the remaining rounds of the first half of the fight. But in the second half of the fight, it was really all Usyk. Derek Chisora was just following him around and not really getting much done. What I can say, though, is Derek Chisora showed, and we do have to factor in that was Usyk's first test at heavyweight. He had never felt power like that before. Even now, he says that's the hardest he's been hit, was in the Derek Chisora fight, and I can believe it. Derek Chisora was winding up huge overhand rights that were hitting Usyk in the chest, and it would have been shocking to get hit like that by a 250-pound man, crazy Zimbabwean man who's throwing wild overhand right haymakers. He'd never faced anything like that at cruiserweight. He probably hadn't felt anything like that. Maybe he had in sparring, but certainly not in a competition fight since maybe the amateurs. So yeah, you could see that Usyk was a little shocked by the ferocity of Chisora's attacks and the weight behind his punches, because he had Usyk on his P's and Q's. He had him on the back foot in that fight. Crazy Zimbabwean. He was throwing punches from Bulawayo. The punch would start. This is how wide and arcing cricket bowl style punches that Chisora was throwing. They would start in Bulawayo and travel over Harare, up through Southern Africa, Central Africa, over Europe, and then they would eventually swing down into London and land on Usyk's chest. Chisora's punches were crazy in that fight. But yeah, Chisora, because he got a short neck, he comes in with his head low, chin down, and he was attacking so fast that Usyk didn't have time to really punch pick, and he was only seeing the top of Chisora's head a lot of the time. Do you know what I mean? So it just made it more awkward for Usyk to walk him onto nice counters. But yeah, Derek Chisora is another possibility for Oleksandr Usyk. He's the number 2. heavyweight with the IBF. He's the de facto mandatory, as I understand it, with the IBF. Is Del Boy Derek Chisora. See, there you go. IBF, Derek Chisora is ranked number 2, number 1 not rated. Another possibility would be Filip Hrgović, right? Hrgović is, let's double back again a second. Hrgović is ranked number 2 by the WBO. All right, so he's a high-ranking fight with the WBO, but you got Moses Atama ahead of him. So, presumably, if Hrgović did get to fight Oleksandr Usyk, it would be a voluntary defense. Hrgović isn't in a mandatory position at the moment, and he's got a fight coming up anyway against David Adelaide. So we'll see how that one goes. But if he gets past Adelaide, and I expect him to, then, yeah, it would be a case of Usyk voluntarily giving him a shot. Or maybe Hrgović fights for a vacant belt against somebody, but again, then Usyk is not in the conversation for that. All right, so moving on from Hrgović. And by the way, is there anyone here that thinks Hrgović has a chance against Oleksandr Usyk, or does Usyk win that comfortably too? Adia says, Hatman, have you seen the Don Charles interview of Radio Raheem laying into Chisora saying it's this kind of criticism that's led to the downfall of the black race? Yeah, I did see that, and it's typical Don Charles. It's the kind of nonsense he would come out with. Hardly surprising. Bigger Ank says, Hrgović does not have the gas tank to be a problem for Usyk. I would agree with you. Yeah. Shay says, I think Hrgović is a big challenge for Usyk. But what I will say, though, just to maybe contradict myself slightly, I don't think Hrgović has got a bad gas tank necessarily. I think his gas tank management is really poor. Hrgović throws... he doesn't pace himself well, is what I want to say. Because if you look at his actual punch numbers, Hrgović throws a lot of punches. Yeah, if you look at his punch totals on BoxRec and compare them to other fighters, he throws a lot of shots. In fact, Hrgovic's punch output is similar to Usyk over a 10 or 12 round bout, believe it or not. But Hrgović doesn't pace himself well. He tends to throw loads of shots in the early rounds and leaves himself nothing for the back end of the fight. Then he's knackered. Do you know what I mean? Like plodding around the ring knackered. So he needs to learn to pace himself better. Exactly, Danny. He tries to sprint the marathon. It's exactly what Hrgović does. Tries to sprint the marathon. But either way, I wouldn't pick him over Usyk right now. And I agree with what Encircled says. I don't think Usyk hits that hard. A shout out to Count Drago. He says, how do you think Usyk does against the prime Klitschko's? I think he beats them both. Yeah, I think Usyk beats both Klitschko's. Prime for prime. Both of them. Vitaly and Vladimir. I think he'd have a harder time with Vitaly. Because Vitaly, a bit more awkward. A bit more difficult to hit. Better chin. So the Vitaly fight, I think, would have been a more awkward fight. Closer fight. But I see him beating Vladimir all day long. Not just because of the skills and the speed and all that kind of stuff. The southpaw style and whatever. But also because, as I spoke about earlier, Usyk is just a much stronger character than Vladimir Klitschko mentally. You know, so I see Usyk beating Vlad all day long. With Vitaly being a more difficult fight, but I was still picking over Vitaly as well. Shout out to HC for the super chat. He says, I got Kabayel beating Usyk or running him close. Okay. There was a couple of other people in the chat also picking Kabayel over Usyk. Hopefully Kabayel gets his opportunity in the next 12 months. Joseph Parker really should be next up if Usyk keeps hold of that particular belt, the WBO. But after him, if Usyk carries on and has still got the WBC belt, Kabayel should be the next one if Usyk gets past Joseph Parker. So hopefully we get to see it sooner rather than later and find out whether you are correct, HC. Shout out to you for the super chat. Oops, I skipped one there. Fabio Wardley's another possibility. Unless Fabio Wardley lands something beyond a punch from the gods. I don't see him beating Oleksandr Usyk, even at this stage of Usyk's career where he is slowing down, in a month of Sundays. So is that a fight that any of you guys would want to see? Fabio Wardley versus Oleksandr Usyk? Because surely that is one of the easiest wins of Oleksandr Usyk's career against Fabio Wardley. I mean, Usyk is always technically better than everybody. Technically better than Fury, technically better than AJ, Dubois, all these guys. But all the guys I just mentioned are much technically better than Wardley. The gulf between Usyk and Wardley in terms of skill and technique is crazy. It's so crazy. That really would be one of the biggest upsets in heavyweight history, in my opinion, if a Fabio Wardley were to beat Oleksandr Usyk. That would be like close to Tyson Douglas in terms of how crazy it would be. Yeah, I don't see that at all. Wensheng says, I think Usyk gets him out of there early. I guess you're talking about Fabio Wardley. Yeah, I reckon there's a good chance he stops Wardley too. The gulf in skill is just too much. I think Wardley would get overwhelmed pretty quick. He was overwhelmed at points against Justice Hooney. You know? If you're getting overwhelmed by Justice Hooney, God help you against Usyk. And finally, and I did want to leave this to last, because I think it's probably the least likely, even though it's the name that was bandied about by Turki Al-Sheikh and maybe a lot of casual boxing fans and some hardcore boxing fans as well, because it's a hot name at the moment, and that is Moses Atalma. You had Turki Al-Sheikh saying that he would like Atalma to fight Oleksandr Usyk, like Usyk hasn't beaten enough British heavyweights for now. Is Turkey trying to get all the British heavyweights out of boxing? I'm being facetious, obviously. I'm joking. But yeah, he's offering up Moses Atalma apparently for an Oleksandr Usyk fight. Okay, Atalma does have the youth, the speed, the power, athleticism, the ignorance of youth that you sometimes need in boxing. It gives you an advantage, but it can also be a disadvantage. All those things being said, I would not want to put Atalma in with an Oleksandr Usyk right now. His next fight is against Dillian Whyte. Let's see how he does there. Let's see Moses Atalma actually tested. Let's see him taking some rounds. Let's see him have to solve some puzzles. He's only 20 years of age. Since he's missed the opportunity to break Mike Tyson's record, and I think that that was something which would have been worth rushing him for a, let's say, vacant belt or something. Since he's missed that, now there's no reason to rush him at all. So, yeah, I think talk of him fighting Usyk is way, way premature. As gifted as he is, as naturally talented as he is, as much potential as he has, I don't see him beating Usyk at this stage at all. Not at all. But maybe some of you guys disagree. Maybe some of you guys think he could go in there with that youth and speed and a southpaw style and push Usyk close or be very dangerous early, maybe even get it done. Shout out to HC for the super chat. He says, have you seen a more shameless attention seeker and disingenuous boxer than Tyson Fury? No, I haven't. Long story short, no, I haven't. Tyson Fury is the most dishonest fighter that I've ever seen in my lifetime. I've never seen such a dishonest fighter. And I'll talk about his latest bit of dishonesty in tomorrow's live stream, because he's now coming out offering fake sympathy, is what it is, to Daniel Dubois, defended him, saying, leave him alone, he's not a quitter. You can't call any fighter a quitter who's brave enough to step in the ring. There are no quitters in boxing. Fury's coming out with all this disingenuous stuff, which I'll break down, because you guys know, I know Luke Partridge and his dad John. Not personally, I mean, I know their psychology like the back of my hand. I've been studying those two for a long time. I know exactly what makes them tick. Yeah? And I'll break down exactly why Partridge is saying all this stuff about Dubois. Exactly why it is and what it's really all about. And it will make perfect sense to you when I explain it. And when I explain it in tomorrow's stream, it needs to start trending on social media. Other people need to start making videos about it, because we need to stop what Partridge is trying to do right now before it gets out of hand, before he starts convincing people that he's sincere once again. Because that's what this guy does. He bamboozles people. So when I explain why Partridge is doing this in tomorrow's stream, yeah, I want to see other people make videos about it. I want to see it trending. I want to see people making comments about it on X and all over social media, so we can get ahead of Tyson Fury's shenanigans once more. Just like we got ahead of Tyson Fury's shenanigans when he was trying to avoid the Usyk fight and have all these joke fights instead. Yeah? We contributed to the pressure that was applied to him. So we need to do the same thing again with Partridge, because he's just relentless with his lies, gaslighting, mind games, terrible. I've never seen anything like it in all my years following the sport of boxing. Somebody is dishonest. I'm talking about boxers now. When it comes to promoters, different story, right? But boxers, yeah, I've never seen one as consistently dishonest and scheming and manipulative as Tyson Fury. Never seen it before. Never seen anything like it before. It's crazy. Kyle says, you see Clarissa Shields claims she's accomplished more than Usyk. I mean, oh my God. Oh my God. Deontay was speaking of the most whatever I've seen, in the case of Tyson Fury, the biggest liar I've ever seen as far as a boxer in my life. Deontay Wilder's the most delusional boxer I've ever seen. But Clarissa Shields is giving him a run for his money. Yeah, she's giving him a run for his money. Clarissa Shields is so awful, so delusional, and just so vile. And her delusion is a big part of it. Constantly calling out Keith Thurman for all those years. That was weird. And just let me give you my opinion on why she was calling out Keith Thurman specifically, and why she's been calling out Jake Paul. Jake Paul would knock Clarissa Shields out cold. All right. But she's been calling certain people out. I explain why. Because there is still this belief among certain sections of the African American community that if you're not African American, let's say pure African American, if there is such a thing as pure, then you're not going to be as good as an African American can be. Keith Thurman is mixed race. He's half white, half black. I'm telling you, in my opinion, one of the reasons that Clarissa Shields has been targeting Keith Thurman is because he's half white, and she thinks that makes him weak. Because she's not calling out, Errol Spence and all these fully black fighters. She's calling out Keith Thurman, in my opinion, because he's like a light-skinned guy. And in the African-American community in particular, they see like biracials, as they call them there, as kind of weak. This is the perception they have, right? And so that's why, in my opinion, she's been calling him out for the longest. And Jake Paul, because he's actually white. Yes, I think she's that ignorant. And of course, she got knocked out by one of her sparring partners, who I'm not sure if he was a Latino guy or a white guy or whatever he was, but he hit her with a left hook, knocked her on her back. And after that, she started claiming that he didn't have padding in his gloves, or they were technical sparring and he took advantage, or some nonsense, right? Anyone who's seen footage of Clarissa Shields sparring men, anyone with any kind of boxing experience at all, can tell right away that the male sparring partners are holding back. They're clearly holding back. They're clearly not punching with the same kinetic chain, right? The same authority that they would when they're sparring another man. They're holding back. And by holding back, of course, they don't want to go in there and knock out a woman. Do you know what I mean? A lot of them probably had to be persuaded or paid quite a lot to spar a woman. And they don't want to look like an a-hole by knocking a woman out. Do you know what I mean? So they're holding back, even though she is obnoxious. But that one guy maybe got tired of her nonsense and didn't hold back. And she got flattened by some random guy who's not even any good. So, yeah, the whole Clarissa Shields thing is awful. You know, totally delusional. Thinking she can take on men and all this stuff is just, oh dear. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. I don't even pay her any attention because she really is one of them people where if you give her attention, you're just encouraging her. Exactamundo says, I like Shields. She's a character and I like that, but calling out Ali at 47 years old. I guess she's called out Layla Ali. Lost respect for her Jake Paul behavior. Well, of course, with female boxing, the talent pool is so shallow that somebody like a Clarissa Shields can pick up all these different titles in various weight classes because there's hardly anybody fighting in those weight classes. You know? In female boxing, you've got a maximum of 3 or 4 fighters who are somewhat competent. I'm not talking about elite or world level or anything. I'm just talking about per weight class in female boxing, you've got a maximum of 3 or 4 fighters who are competent. The rest of them are absolutely diabolically bad. So the talent pool is tiny. And what I mean to say is, achieving world champion status as a female fighter is nowhere near the level of achievement as it is as a male fighter, because in male boxing, there's far more competition. Way more competition. So yeah, that's another thing that Clarissa Shields obviously isn't coming to terms with, is the fact that her achievements are they pale in comparison to the equivalent achievements of a male boxer who won that many titles in different weight classes, because the male boxer, to pick up titles in all those weight classes, would have fought much better fighters, much stiffer competition. Anyway, peeps, I'm going to bring an end to this stream now. I'd like to shout out each and every one of you for joining the conversation. Much appreciated. It's always great chatting to you guys. And a special shout out to those who donated via Super Chat. They were HC, Someone, Mitchell Watson, Black Dynamite, Jay Silver, Corey King, Belt Loops Matter, Ibrahim, Ocean Blue, Matt Borgerson, Green Entity, Bobs, Morazman, KB, Patriotic Joe, Workstation 1, Mr. Luca, Jack Trussler, Danny, and yeah, that's all the guys in case I've missed anybody. So yeah, shout out to everyone for locking in, being part of the conversation. It's been great as ever. And if I can ask you a small favor to just stick a like on this stream, it really helps it get seen. For people watching it on replay, it helps bump it up in the searches and suggested videos and stuff like that. So if you could all just do me the small courtesy of sticking a like on this stream if you enjoyed it. Until next time, take care, be good. I'll catch you guys on the other side. Peace.